everybody. Welcome to today's episode of Party Like a Marketer, the podcast dedicated to cannabis marketing, public relations, and authentic storytelling. I'm your host, Lisa Buffo, the founder and CEO of Cannabis Marketing Association. And you can find me on Instagram at LeeBuff and Twitter at LeeBuff21. Whether you're new to this space or an experienced professional, Party Like a Marketer has something for you. Today's conversation features Drew Peterson, Director of the West Coast for MNI Targeted Media. Drew is a recognized leader in online advertising strategy with over 10 years of experience working with some of the most reputable names in media, including Time, Fortune, CNN Money, and MNI Targeted Media. His commitment to success and unparalleled tenacity has directly corresponded to his rapid rise at Time Inc./Meredith. He was awarded the prestigious Times Salesperson of the Year and Time Inc. Chairman's Award winner in 2015. After several successful years as a media seller, Drew was promoted to management at MNI in 2016, where he was instrumental in enhancing MNI's footprint from Seattle to San Diego. Consistent with his ability to recognize new markets, Drew is now at the forefront of MNI's growing cannabis business and an advocate of its Cannabis exchange. He is a graduate of Arizona State University. Hey, welcome everybody to today's episode of Party Like a Marketer, the podcast dedicated to cannabis marketing, public relations, and authentic storytelling produced by the Cannabis Marketing Association. I'm your host, Lisa Buffo, and today's guest is Drew Peterson, the Director of the West for MNI Targeted Media. Drew, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Lisa. I'm excited to be here.
Of course. Well, could you first start off by telling our guests about yourself? Where are you calling from? Who's Drew, and tell us about MNI as well.
Yeah. So today I'm calling from San Francisco, California, here in the Bay Area. My name is Drew Peterson. I'm the Director of the West Coast for MNI Targeted Media. And at MNI, we're a team of audience strategists spread out all across the country. We've got about 1,200 digital clients that we work with annually. And between those clients, we serve about 7.4 billion impressions a year. So we are the targeted advertising division of Meredith Corporation, and Meredith is the largest publisher on the planet.
Awesome. And can you just specify what you mean when you say audience specialist?
So audience strategist.
Strategist.
So what we really excel in is hyper-targeted media when it comes to digital and magazines. So one example I like to give, say Wells Fargo, for example. They've got about 37 campaigns that they run every year. One of those might be a checking account campaign, and they're not going to come to us for their checking account campaign because you can target, it's really adults 18 plus. It's not as targeted. There's a lot of vendors out there that do that. Where Wells Fargo does use us is their wealth investment management division, where you've got to target individuals with 14 million plus in investable assets. That's a really hard niche audience to find online. And that's something that we do to help out a brand like that from a national perspective. So that's one microcosm of why you might turn to MNI for some kind of hyper-targeted initiative.
So you help connect the brand or the client with their ideal buyer persona in print and online.
Exactly. And it's all about, defining that medium and serving that ad at the right time in the right environment to get that user to take a pre-desired action. So whether that's native and spending time with a piece of content or, driving cart checkouts, new member acquisition, or maybe it's mass amounts of highly qualified site traffic to one of these brands that just got a really great e-commerce experience built out for them. So a slew of what we do, but it's all hyper-focused on every campaign, and everything we do is custom built by campaign for each advertiser.
Awesome. So I'd like to get into that a little bit more. And your website mentions the benefits of using multiple data points to analyze and build your brand. And we talk about using data. And we even say at CMA that we serve data-driven marketers, right? It's sort of the core of everything that we're doing. So how has this strategy helped grow the cannabis industry that we know today? Cannabis is obviously a startup industry, and so we're filled with startup entrepreneurs and startup brands who often have limited marketing budgets. So, how has using these data points helped grow the industry and these brands? And how do you see that shaping the future over the next few years?
Absolutely. So Really, when it comes to multiple data points, the always the place I like to start is talking about market research, right? And syndicated data. So where we always start when we custom built each one of these plans is with premium syndicated market research. And we've actually got access to over $500,000 worth of every syndicated market tool you can possibly imagine. So you've got Nielsen, ComScore, we've even got Mintel reports, MRI. So we're using leading data to really define our media plan before we even build it out. So we're going to identify those media consumption habits. And as we know, that greatly differs if you're looking to target, say, a millennial mom or possibly women 55 plus, or maybe that's that kind of active male who's at the gym. So a lot of different targeting tactics that will go into this, but it starts with the research and identifying those media consumption habits.
And do you, just to follow up on that, do you also, so you take the syndicated data, this consumer research that's out there, do you also work with a company's internal business intelligence and match it up, say like a brand's point of sale system, or help understand, help them understand who their buyer personas are with that information, or kind of work the way you had just mentioned?
So totally, it definitely goes both ways. It's funny you bring that up because I was literally just doing this yesterday with the largest delivery app in California, and we're taking a look at their sales data. So one thing we're doing in that perspective, and there's a lot we do with this data, but just as one example, oftentimes when we're focused on conversions and cart checkouts through the app, a lot of times we'll drive users to that cart checkout experience. A good amount of them will convert, but there's also that percentage of users that gets to the cart, drops a couple items in their basket, some pre-rolls, maybe some flour, but then they don't actually make the purchase. So we work back with the brands, their POS sales data, to then serve a custom message to those that didn't convert with maybe some kind of, say, 35% off deal when previously it was a 25% off, to further facilitate and bolster those conversions.
So you also do retargeting?
Absolutely. Yep. And I've got a lot in terms of data points and retargeting. One of the biggest conversion drivers on every campaign we run, and to go back to your initial question about, multiple data points and how that really helps grow the industry, one of the biggest conversion drivers on the online space is with our artificial intelligence modeling pixel that we call the AIM pixel. Now, ultimately what this does is, we're all familiar with, site retargeting and retargeting within advertising, but what the AIM pixel does is it's a cookieless pixel that's placed on the advertiser's site, also on the checkout button or maybe that cart. And what we're doing is we're extracting insights from all of these users that have been driven to your page, that are already interacting with your brand, making purchases. And then the coolest thing is we're actually able to build out lookalike targeting based on all of these different segments that the AIM pixel is pulling from. And that allows you to expand on the audience that is converting. And on any given campaign where we've got the AIM pixel, we're driving about 80% of our conversions through that pixel alone, and all of the insights we're able to extract from that kind of technology.
It's cookieless? So
it's a cookie,
but
yeah.
it does the same, it has the same effect where it's able to see where you're going and what you're doing and retarget based on that.
Exactly. So it's a cookieless pixel, and this pixel is also placed on tens of thousands of other sites. So when that user comes on and makes a conversion, we're extracting insights such as, which websites did they spend time on before they came to your site? Where did they go after? Are they spending time on pop culture sites, sports sites, weather sites? So we're looking at the kind of context that they're doing. We're looking at what mediums are they on? Are they spending more time on their mobile devices versus desktop or tablet? Where are they actually converting? Maybe they might visit your site from their mobile phone, but they feel more comfortable actually making that conversion from a desktop. So the AIM pixel is identify all of these kind of insights in order to serve ads to the right kind of audience to further grow these brands and bolster conversions.
So that's interesting. So I know there's changes happening in the cookie world right now. So the brands are still able to leverage that type of technology and get that insight. It's just going to look differently than it did previously.
Yeah, and it was a big deal. Google was going to phase out all third-party cookies, and now it's not so much of a pressing issue. No one really knows what it's going to be, but regardless of whether you can use cookies or not. I talked about the AIM pixel, which is a cookieless solution. We actually have a proprietary deterministic solution known as data match. And for anyone that doesn't know what deterministic means, loose way to think of it is that it's going to be a cookie-free targeting solution. So we've got tons we can do with cookies, but outside of that, you can actually look into an individual's cell phone through deterministic, and you can look at all of the different apps they have installed on their phone. And so in the cannabis space, if you're looking for a cannabis consumer, they might have an app like Weed Maps or Leafly or something like that. And not only that, but they're using that app multiple times per month. So when we see a user that has multiple cannabis related apps installed, we take a look back at that in addition to the frequency of use. So that's just one way to help create a holistic picture of that consumer. And then we're actually able to shop that, scrub that data against offline data sets as well, all matched together in an individual's email address. I know I'm getting technical, but long story short,
follow. Yeah.
We've got deterministic solutions to reach advertisers in addition to all these really cool things we're doing with third-party cookies.
So you are able to, you're able to work with brands in a few ways, use this market research and this higher level syndicated consumer data, but also behavioral information that users and customers are doing on their own phones and their own browser search. So you're able to help these brands, both from that 5,000 foot view, but also kind of individually as far as what their customers are doing and target them appropriately.
Absolutely. Yep. And it's really about marrying that syndicated markets data with all of the various tactics we can do online. So we would never build out a media plan without truly understanding that audience, where they live and where they're going to be most likely to convert.
And, without knowing that syndicated market data that you're getting, is that actually measuring folks's like cannabis consumption habits, or is it more kind of lifestyle demographics based?
So I would say it's more the latter. It's more of that lifestyle demographics, such as, what social platform are cannabis users going to be most likely to spend time on? What medium between desktop, mobile, and tablet? What time of day would they tend to make these purchases? So it's more about the consumption habits overall. But in terms of what products they're buying and whatnot, from a third-party data perspective, we've got partners that we've integrated with our cannabis DSP known as Cannabis, that actually tap into past purchase data. So we can tell whether you're buying flower, whether you're buying pre-rolls or cartridges, and how often you tend to purchase, what day of the week you tend to purchase. So we can serve a sequence of ads leading up to that moment of purchase the next time you go into the store and get you thinking about any other given brand that you might not have purchased last time.
So, I mean, that sounds to be a very compelling solution for brands and retailers to be able to get that type of information where, in the industry is fairly new in this sense, just given that everything is done in the dispensary. I know a lot has changed over the past year with COVID and now doing, order ahead and curbside pickup and things like that. But it really seems like something that could really power brands and retailers as they move forward and look to the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about, the original question was about how these multiple data points are used to help grow a brand. I mean, we've got case studies from whether it's conversions and actual cart checkouts to a lift in site traffic. There's several different KPIs that you can use this market research and these tactics to help grow. So there's really no limit in terms of what we can do to help a brand in terms of their objectives.
And do you focus on, one of the things we speak with brands about is there's always the constantly going after new customers, right? Who's the consumer of tomorrow? Who's not in that dispensary yet, but who's going to be? And retargeting and upselling your current customers to make sure that they're loyal and they're coming back. Do you work with brands on both sides of that, or sort of focus on one or the other?
So absolutely both. When we're working with a lot of these large cannabis delivery apps, there's a very high lifetime value of each of these customers. So, the KPI for any given campaign, you usually want to focus on one, but there's just as much value, I would say, in retaining those other customers, given the growth of the space and all of these competitors coming in. So you really want to put a lot of dollars into retaining those customers. But at the same time, we've got other tactics on the media plan that are going after these new customers. So in terms of that aim pixel we were talking about, we've got different pixels placed on these different buttons. So the insights of who's going to be a new user might look a little different than these recurring users. So we're taking all of that data to almost treat them separately to drive results for both.
And you just mentioned focusing on one KPI, is there one that jumps out to you that you see the most that brands are using, or one
Yeah.
you suggest kind of when you start working with them?
Yeah, I would say, usually the initial objectives. Now, a lot of these brands are new to the space, right? And it's
Yeah.
a swim time for a lot of these brands. So I would say the most common objective that we see on these initial campaigns is going to be an increase in site traffic. Because what we're finding, you mentioned about the difference between in dispensary buying and then buying within the e-commerce platform. A lot of brands are putting significant investments into their e-commerce platform. And especially with all the laws that are coming out now where you can actually sell directly through your e-commerce. So what we're finding is there's tons of brands that are partnering with these great e-commerce companies that are really optimizing your app, creating this great mobile experience, a lot of great call to action and data that goes into building these. But then once they get the app built, where's the traffic at? And it's not just going to come organically. It's important to have that paid element to drive not just site traffic, but highly qualified site traffic. So I would say as an initial KPI, driving qualified site traffic and CTR would definitely be the main one. And then after that, once we get that site traffic built out, then we can start tracking conversions and whatnot. But that would be the main KPI for sure.
And it's, it kind of comes back to marketing 101. And some folks, I think, see this industry or see this space as, we're starting over, we're doing something brand new, it's a new product, we got to talk to customers. And yes, that's all true, but it's still the basics of, right? Like knowing who's your buyer persona, knowing who your customers are, and making sure the right folks are coming to you and coming back and purchasing from you. And I'm really excited about the e-commerce type trend. I know myself. Yeah, like personally as a consumer, I know what I want before I go to the dispensary. So it's much easier to be able to order ahead and say, hey, I'm out of this. I'm just restocking like I'm going to the grocery. And yes, sometimes I'll get upsold or I'll try something new if it compels me. But the ability to be able to do that, I think, is really powerful for the industry and just shows that the industry is maturing in the direction folks thought it would, towards that CPG e-commerce direction, under the regulations that we have, but we're heading there way faster than it has been in years past.
Oh, absolutely. From a personal consumer standpoint, I mean, you go on some of these sites and these e-commerce experiences, and it is just as robust and rich as, any of these other e-commerce retailers like sporting goods stores or, other retailers where we're buying clothes. I mean, these websites are dialed in and totally reputable and user-friendly. So yeah, definitely becoming a big thing, and the brands are there.
And I even see them with like almost even better product photography where you could like zoom in and see the nug and look at the product and say like, this looks good. And I think in years past, people would have thought, no one's going to buy online. They want to smell it and experience it in store. But that doesn't seem to be the case.
Totally with you there.
And do you have any interesting data points or insights that you've seen having run these campaigns for brands that might have been different or jumped out at you that you were surprised by?
I was hoping you'd ask, Lisa. No, yeah, we've got a lot of cool things we do. So I talked about, data match and what we do from a deterministic perspective, but let's spend a little time with, what we're doing with cookies right now, because that is still very much in play.
Currently,
absolutely. So one of the coolest things we're doing is actually condition-based targeting. So obviously cannabis can be used to treat a few main functions such as anxiety, glaucoma, maybe there's some kind of sexual health related issue. And we actually have data providers that we can overlay on Cannabis to only serve ads to those with any of those kind of disabilities, if you will, or treatments that are needed. So that's one really cool thing is condition-based targeting. We actually leverage a data provider known as Crossix, which is very common for a lot of, think of like the healthcare companies out there that want to serve a targeted ad based on a condition. So one common question we get when we're talking about this is, oh my gosh, is this HIPAA compliant? It is absolutely 100% HIPAA compliant. So that's one really cool thing we do from a condition-based standpoint. But there's several other things we do as well, such as we talked about the past.
Just to clarify, that is for medical products, medical cannabis products, the condition-based, or on the adult use side?
It can be on either side. Good question.
Yeah, go ahead. I just wanted to clarify.
No, all good. I talk fast sometimes, Lisa, so you got to hum me in over here.
You're good.
So we've got condition-based targeting. We can also identify, pet owners. We know that CBD for pet owners has been a huge deal. So we can actually identify, say, owners of pets that live within a certain proximity of one of these dispensaries or retailers that are selling a product. So not only using the geolocation data, but we're using that in combination with this behavioral data, knowing that they own a dog. So that's kind of something cool we're doing. Obviously we can do, competitive conquesting for dispensaries. So if you want to go after people that are buying from your neighbors or your other competitors that are nearby, we can drop targeted geofences down to a 3-foot radius around each of these dispensaries. And we're focused on—
Wow, 3 feet.
Yep, within 3 feet. So, and you can actually extrapolate anyone who might be working there per se. So the bud tenders, they might be there for 40 hours a week. You don't necessarily need to serve them an ad. So we can actually have the ability to strip out those based on dwell time if they're working at a dispensary, and only target the consumers who are in there for 5-15 minutes picking up their orders. So that's something cool we're doing.
That's really interesting. And I could see, particularly in cities or really dense environments where there's a lot of retailers, I live in Denver, how that could be really powerful for them as well.
Absolutely. Yep. And then you can track the foot traffic as well. So you can say that, hey, I stole, for example, 1,200 consumers from your 5 neighboring dispensaries over the past 2 months, and we brought them into your dispensary. So you can actually track that attribution as well from each of the dispensaries you're stealing traffic from. So that's another really cool thing.
And do you work mostly with brands or retailers or both?
It's really across the board. So we work a lot client direct with the brands themselves. We're working with cannabis marketing agencies that handle a collection of cannabis advertisers. But I would say, at least in my experience here on the West Coast, most of it has been working with the client themselves.
Yeah, the brand. That makes sense.
Yep.
Cool. Any other insights you want to share that you've learned or seen, like, anything interesting happening on the brand side? Just any other data points?
Yeah. So, and one other just really cool thing in terms of data points as it pertains to magazines. So we've talked a lot about digital and how these national websites are stepping up to accept cannabis ads. But in the beginning, I mentioned we're owned by Meredith Corporation, which is the largest magazine publisher on the planet. Not only do we represent Meredith titles, but we represent a lot of other publishing houses and a lot of privately owned titles as well. So
Could you name a few just so folks get the familiarity?
Absolutely. Fortune magazine. We represent Sports Illustrated, Time, Esquire, Men's Health, Women's Health, Cosmopolitan. And we represent these brands, not from a national standpoint, but from a targeted standpoint, whether that's geo-targeted or audience targeted. So I'll give you kind of 2 cool examples of how we use data for a couple of big brands in cannabis and then on the CBD side. So we're all familiar with Cresco Labs, for example, right? One of the biggest names in cannabis. They actually run magazines through us. And what they did was they've got a new gummy line called Wonder Wellness, and they wanted to target consumers in Illinois because they've identified that as one of their fastest growing markets for this individual product. And we were actually able to get 3 magazine titles. Got it written down. It was Men's Health, Women's Health, and Cosmopolitan, all approved these ads for Wonder Wellness to run in the state of Illinois. So that's something where we took
in print,
in magazines, full page ads in these national magazines, but they're geo-targeted to Illinois. So we're not running ads in all these states where cannabis isn't legal.
Interesting. So there's the ability to say, these 100 magazines are only going to be distributed in Illinois. And even though it's the issue of Cosmo, these ones specifically have that ad.
Yep. And we're not quite at 100 yet, getting there in terms of the approvals. But the way that works is we'll get an ad. It's really important to have that creative from the client up front. And then we run that creative by the titles. And what we're finding is by the week, there's more and more titles that are stepping up that are accepting these ads. So there's been a few that are more progressive than others. But that's kind of what we've done from an in-book perspective.
So I think the lesson here for everyone to hear is that there's more options available than there have ever been in the past as far as channels for marketing your brand and print and national print. And in these titles that were, previously closed to cannabis brands now are accepting these dollars.
Yep, Absolutely. And then to stay within the data conversation and tie that even further to magazines. So what I just talked about for Wonder Wellness, that's an in-book insertion. So it's a full page in a national magazine. Now, what's even more powerful and more impactful is that when you run what's called a cover wrap. And for anyone that hasn't heard of a cover wrap, it's literally wrapping the front, back, and inside covers of a national magazine with your advertisement. So what this does for advertisers is a few different things. One, you're drafting off of the trust and credibility of some of the biggest names in publishing. So for example, Fortune magazine, and everyone's familiar with the Fortune 500 issue, which is their tentpole issue that comes out. We've actually got an advertiser right now that's running. They make CBD smokes, right? So it's not a cigarette, but it looks like a cigarette, and it's all CBD. We've seen a few of these companies.
Hemp-based CBD.
Hemp-based CBD, exactly. Now, their primary goal of this brand is they want to get in some of the biggest convenience stores and liquor stores in the country. Now, how do you do that? With an in-book ad that we just talked about, you can blanket any subscriber of those magazines, but these guys, they want to go after decision makers of convenience stores that have a certain sales volume, and ideally, these convenience store owners own multiple. So I'll give you Circle K, for example. We are actually targeting owners of Circle K convenience stores across the Western United States. In most cases, these owners own multiple Circle Ks, and we've even overlaid data from a sales volume perspective. So we're only reaching convenience stores that do over $50 million in sales every year. So talk about data and targeting. And then we serve a series of Fortune magazine wrapped with this advertiser's messaging to these consumers. And we can reach them at home, or you can reach them at the office. And we hit them with a series of magazines in order to get that conversation going. Now, from a conversion perspective, if we're serving, say, 1,000 of these issues to these different convenience store owners, you get one or two of these guys to buy off. And our advertiser is now shipping their carts of CBD cigarettes across the country by the trainload. So that's something we can do really cool from a data perspective and tie that to magazines in a high impact execution.
Well, and that's interesting because that's a B2B play, but sort of through a B2C model that you would think by wrapping a magazine like that, but specifically targeting the owners of these stores.
Well said. So yeah, Wonder Wellness, very much consumer. This one, very much B2B, because similar to the way we use programmatic data to define an audience before we serve an ad, we can get just as granular and actually sometimes even more granular with our cover wrap execution than we can with programmatic digital, because we've got so much offline data into these consumers or these B2B decision makers before we serve them a magazine. So very cool thing we do with data on that space.
And is that, would that concept apply to and I'm kind of shooting from the hip here, but for brands trying to reach retailers who are trying to extend their wholesale distribution, would be working with, I see cannabis magazines, and when I'm in the waiting room at the dispensary and I see the, kind of like the local ones that have the ads and they're wrapped. Are you seeing cannabis brands do that?
Yeah. So you're talking about like actually in the waiting room at a dispensary and putting a magazine in there?
Doing the B2B play, like say a brand, my brand is trying to get into more retailers where I would actually wrap a magazine that is
1,000%. Yep.
Yeah.
Now I'm with you. Totally. So that's another thing we can do as well. We've got a list. We actually pulled this list with my marketing team, and we're using it for some of our outgoing marketing. But we've got a list of all of these dispensary owners throughout the US, similar to like we did for the CBD smokes. You can target some owners that are multi-state operators or that own more than 3 dispensaries. So it's more of a kind of a premium splash when you reach that user. So we can absolutely do that and reach dispensary owners so you can get your product on their shelves.
Cool. Okay. So you work with brands, you work on the B2B side, and you can work targeted, local, statewide, but also national as well.
Yep. Nailed it.
Awesome. Any other data points or things you want to bring up before we get to our next questions?
I think I pretty much covered the gamut there. I'm good on that front.
And I would say, before we transition, are there any like best practices or any advice you would give to a brand who would come to you and would sort of start on this more targeted journey? Like where do you either see them coming in at? What are they doing to get ready to be able to launch campaigns like this? Or where do they need the most help? Like just kind of top of your head, what would be the advice you have? Or is there something you always, that kind of always comes up with the clients that you wish they knew maybe a little earlier?
Yeah, the one thing that comes to mind is really get your creative built out as soon as you can. Because the way the process works online and for magazines is we need to do a Q&A of that creative, run it by the exchange and make sure that that's firing and getting approved. So in one line, I would say get your creative over to us or to any vendor you might be partnering with as soon as possible in order to flag any potential issues with the creative or delivery issues. So I find oftentimes, we'll have a campaign launching on October 1st and we get the assets on the last day of September. And oftentimes there might not be enough time to get that ad live, and sometimes there's issues or delivery issues. So that's kind of the number one thing, is get your creative created as soon as possible.
That makes sense, because it does have to get approved by the publisher, and depending on where you are, there might be some compliance issues to make sure it's showing the right imagery and words in there. That makes sense. Any on that note, any bigger mistakes or things you see on the creative side that kind of repeatedly get pushed back?
Other than the standard ones, you can't appear to target minors. You can't have any actual cannabis leaves in your creative. You can't have anyone blowing smoke. So outside of those kind of general restrictions, nothing else that we've really seen get rejected. But for the most part, the brands are aware of these guidelines and some of the kind of main things they need to stay away from. So we've done a good job of avoiding any of those issues in the past year as we've been working with these brands.
Yeah, that makes sense. And getting out in front of it. I could do a whole podcast episode just on creative and the imagery that is and isn't allowed to be used, but I'll save that one for another day. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, well, I'd like to learn a little bit more about Drew and your own experience in cannabis, given that you've worked with all these brands and have been doing this for MNI for a while. What are some lessons that you have learned in the cannabis marketing space as you've entered and gotten more comfortable?
Totally. So I've learned a ton of lessons working in the cannabis marketing space for the last 3 years. Two that come to mind. So one is getting these cannabis brands into mainstream media is a massive challenge. We've been working on building out our DSP for 3 years, and it's taken us 3 years to get to the point of where we're at. But, when you talk about all the other media, there's challenges with SEM, Google and all these big search engines. It's a very, very delicate dance, and they're just not there yet with that part of, the search environment. Also, when it comes to social, really hard to keep your brand live or really do anything with social at this point. And a lot of the big brands like Facebook and Instagram are shutting these down. And if you're not really careful with your social, well, some of these brands are even getting completely shut down. So those are just two examples of mainstream media. Then you go over to like broadcast, for example. Broadcast isn't accepting any of these spots. So in out of home, you used to see these billboards all over the place, and you still do. But here in California, if you're running on an interstate freeway that goes into another state, brands are now being forced to pull these ads down. So mainstream media has been a huge challenge. And even online was a huge challenge for these brands, which has taken us about 3 years to get 15,000 sites to step up and accept CBD and cannabis. But that's been one of my biggest lessons, is just the challenge for these poor brands to get into mainstream media. And we're finally, we're making moves by the day over here, but digital has really just been the saving grace for these brands, because we can get them into mainstream media, like say Vogue.com or Rolling Stone or CBS Sports. There's a lot of really premium national websites that are stepping up. So that has been very encouraging.
And did you see a change with any of that with COVID, just as everything, moved online and we spent all this time at home on our computers? Did that have an impact on the ability to get things approved or speed it up quicker or not so much?
I wouldn't say from like the approval process that COVID really changed anything. What I would say is that the ordering process, if you've looked at any of these, reports online, the orders skyrocketed during COVID. People couldn't go to the dispensary. You had to use a delivery app. So I feel like, so that was affected. And because of that, more brands started turning to digital because that was the one medium to reach these consumers while they were buying mass amounts of cannabis during the pandemic. So not necessarily more brands stepping up or websites stepping up, but the brands putting heavier dollars against this during that time when we're all stuck at home.
Yeah, I always thought it was funny, like how in 2020 QR codes made a comeback and became like the star of the year. I didn't think they were gonna have that much longevity, but they have been.
I love that you just brought up QR
Yeah.
codes. That's actually talking about data. That's another thing we can do through magazines as well. So, one of the biggest challenges was there was no attribution with the magazine space. Now we've actually got QR codes that we're attaching to these magazine pages. So you have instant ROI from that page that was, seen in one of these national magazines. Scan the QR code, takes you right to that mobile optimized menu where you can make a purchase. So there's another cool thing. Glad you brought that up, Lisa. It wasn't even on my agenda.
Yeah, and everyone knows how to use them now. Now that we've ordered through QR codes for so long. So that's awesome. And I love that because I've also found print pre-COVID was a very hard thing. And in general, it can be hard to track ROI on because, right, even if you buy the magazine, are you reading it, looking at it, taking time. So that brings that attribution element into it and makes it still a compelling channel. Cause I feel like some folks have totally written off print, but that gives it a little more, what's the word? Just emphasis. And that's something that can withstand a little bit longer.
Absolutely.
So how important is it to make sure that your brand or business is current? And are there consequences if it is not? And what I mean by that is really staying on top of current trends that are happening, both in marketing and as far as consumer insights and what you're seeing at that market research level.
Yeah. So the short answer to that, it is very important. And the consequences can be extreme, if I had to put that in 2 words there. So from our side of this, from our side of the fence as a targeted marketer, where we really help out and with staying ahead of these regulations is, we talk about all these state by state regulations, or even, and sometimes when it comes to advertising, there's even county by county or at the municipal level, there's these specific regulations. So we've actually got a 2021, this was just published actually yesterday, but we've got a state-by-state cannabis guideline document on mni.com/cannabis. So because it is so vital for these brands, we get a lot of site traffic from our cannabis offering in general. But what we're finding is that there's a huge need for these state-by-state regulations, especially for these multi-state operators that are, kind of running executions in different states. And it looks a little bit different in Michigan than it does in California, or in Maine, for example. You can only run ads, location-based ads that are in-app, versus here in California, you can run in-app and the mobile web. So I think it's very important to stay ahead of those state-by-state nuances. And we've got kind of a solution to help our brands with that.
Yeah. And I would say on the extreme side, I think, you can lose a market share to a competitor, or you can lose, the ability to remain competitive and on edge if you're not up to date with, not just the regulations from a compliance perspective, that's like the bottom, but also the current trends, what's happening, what's selling, and what direction our consumers moving in. And right. Just to follow up on that, so when you speak with brands, as far as their knowledge of their own consumers and their own understanding of the macro level trends and what's happening in their business, do you feel they have a way to go? Like, are you coming in and doing a lot of the educating as like, hey, here's what's really going on out here, and here's your understanding of it? Or do you see that they're more or less on top of it?
So I would say it depends on the brand, right? For one of the largest delivery apps in the country, and definitely the largest in California, they are like a big sophisticated advertiser that's been around for a decade. They've got their own internal market research, pretty much know what they want. Where we are more there to recommend the different tactics that'll make sense for this internal research they have. But that's kind of an outlier. most brands aren't as sophisticated as these large delivery apps that have been around for 3 years. So for, I would say 90% of the brands we work with from direct, they're coming to us to help identify those media consumption habits and really, what's the best place, time of day, time of year, to get the results we're looking for. So I'd say for the most part, they lean on us, but there are some of these brands that are much bigger than the other ones that have had success for a few years. And so, they've got a slew of information on their end.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what are you most excited for in regards to the future of cannabis? Like excited or hopeful? Where do you see things headed?
Yeah. So where do I see things headed? I mean, I'm hoping for federal legalization one of these days. I would say personally, what I'm most hopeful for is just erasing the stigma in general. From a personal standpoint. I've grown up around a family that wasn't necessarily open to the whole thought of cannabis, and there's this stigma of Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Spicoli living in his mom's basement over here. And so what I'm most hopeful for is, this growing acceptance of cannabis. You see there's all these CEOs and big high-level executives that are running multi-million-dollar companies at peak efficiency. And I just feel like it's like kind of the mainstream just idea that these, if you're inhaling cannabis or, a partaker in the product, you're not necessarily some kind of a, stoner or not someone who can conduct a business. So I just look forward to erasing the stigma. And I think one of the cool things about being here and being in the targeted marketing space is I'm actually in a position to help influence that and change that perception. And that's through data and, serving ads at the right time of day to the right person in that right environment to really change that perception and move the needle in terms of just increasing consumer acceptance. So that would be my biggest thing I'm excited for.
Yeah, I echo that. And I love this industry because I've found some of the most intelligent, thoughtful, highly functioning, smart, intuitive people who are running and starting businesses in this space are also heavy consumers, and they know their products really well. They know what they're talking about. They know their consumption habits. They know themselves, and just interacting, and they live great, balanced to some degree lives, and have a social life. And so they've totally busted the stigma while working inside the space. And I always enjoy that in meeting folks and hearing their stories too.
Absolutely.
And so Leslie, what is your favorite part of working in the cannabis industry?
So I would say my favorite part of working in the industry is, it's the brands and the people we get to work with. So just in terms of our everyday day-to-day interaction before cannabis came out, here at M&I, we work with some of the biggest agencies and holding companies in the country, right? And when we're working with all of these media professionals, they are deeply entrenched in the media space. So sometimes when we go into these meetings, it might be more as a vendor, versus as when we're working with the cannabis space, we're truly going in with a seat at the table. And we're not just a vendor, we're a partner. And to me, what I think the coolest part is, we're getting thank you cards or high fives for running these successful campaigns. And I used the term sink or swim earlier. It's a dire time for a lot of these brands. And like sometimes they have smaller budgets. It's important to go with a proven partner that has a track record of ROI, knows what they're doing, has that kind of credibility. So to me, it's being able to actually help these brands, help them grow and help educate them on, what is programmatic? What is native? How does native fit into the greater piece of the puzzle when we're driving ROI? So to me, that's my favorite part of it is just, the people we get to work with. Like you said, a lot of highly functioning people, no pun intended there. But it's just, it's funner. It's more fun. It's more laid back. But at the same time, it's a bunch of professionals who have a job to get done, and we just help them achieve ROI and grow their brands, and get a hug for it. It's awesome. So that's
That's awesome. I echo that. Well, Drew, is there anything else you want to share or say before we go and wrap up?
I would just say, just in conclusion with everything, it's very encouraging to see everything changing by the day over here, whether it's more magazines stepping up to the plate or more websites. And because of this growing scale, what we're able to do from a data perspective is getting more immense by the week over here. So it's encouraging to see the scale continue to grow. Right now we're at 15,000 websites and counting. And then because of that, there's just all of this really cool technology that we're now able to do for cannabis that previously wasn't there for these advertisers. So I'd say a couple of years ago, it was basic demo targeting. Now these advertisers are able to do everything that the major national brands like Wells Fargo or Pepsi or Coca-Cola is doing. So to me, very encouraging with where the industry's heading. And, if it's federally legal one of these days, then the sky will be the limit and all these mainstream media companies will start stepping up. So that's what I would say in conclusion. But it has just been so fun to work with these clients every day, help them grow their brands, love providing these tangible results and case studies at the end of it. So it's been an absolute whirlwind. We're moving fast and furious over here. But it's genuinely been a blast, and it feels so good just to, be on that other side of the table and be a partner with a lot of these brands.
That's awesome. And Drew, how can folks contact you or connect with you? Is there a website or social media or anything you want to share for our listeners?
Totally. So I would start, mni.com/cannabis. We've got an entire pillar page built out consisting of the, state-by-state guidelines I talked about, all the case studies I've mentioned, anything about Cannabis, our cannabis DSP. So I would start with that. If anyone wants to get in touch with me, my email is drew.petersen, PEDERSEN, and that's MNI.com.
Awesome, Drew. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you today. And thank you for sharing the insights and connecting with our audience. I look forward to talking with you soon and hopefully seeing you in person someday.
Absolutely. So this is a blast. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Party Like a Marketer. Check us out on Instagram at Party Like a Marketer and on our website, thecannabismarketingassociation.com, and engage with us. We love to hear from you. We'll see you next time for another episode next week.